Hi, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live session, Making Text Part of the Equation with Bill Inmon. Obviously, I'm sure most of you already know, but Bill Inmon is a computer scientist recognized by many as the father of the data warehouse. He wrote the first book on data warehousing, held the first conference on the topic, wrote the first article. You get the drift. He's also authored 65 books and was named by Computer World as one of the top 10 most influential people in the history of computing. Welcome, Bill. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Lyndsay. It's my pleasure.
So we spoke a couple of weeks ago and you talked a lot about text and the importance of text. And obviously, as a data integration company, we talk a lot about standard and structured data, but not as much about the importance of unstructured data and text. So, but obviously, we need text to really get a full view of decision making. What would you say is the key value proposition for including text in analytics decision making?
You know, I kind of liken text to the state of California in 1848. In 1848, we are told that you could go to California, walk in the streams, and pick up gold. And once people discovered that, then in 1849, there was this gold rush there. Well, that's the way text is today because there is this wealth of information that's wrapped up in text that isn't being used in the corporate decision-making process. To give you just some of examples of the kinds of things that we encounter are medical records, that medical records are wrapped up in the form of text, which is good for the doctor and the patient. But if you're doing research and need to look at 100,000 patients at the same time, text is not acceptable. Another place that text has great value is in something called hearing the voice of the customer, that corporations that like to stay in business and like to continue to grow and make money take care and listen to their customers. And being responsive to your customer is absolutely at the heart of success of business. And the problem is in today's world, the customer speaks to you in terms of text. So we find then that text is, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let me talk about another place where you find text has a tremendously great business value, and that's in the terms of contracts, corporate contracts. All corporate contracts are text. That's what corporate contracts are made up of. And I've had the opportunity to ask many groups of executives how many executives know what's in their corporate contracts. And to date, not one executive has ever raised their hand and say, "Oh, we know what's in our corporate contracts." And then they say, "Well, Bill, look, we've got 5 million corporate contracts, and each one is different. We can't possibly know what's in our corporate contracts." And yet there is tremendous business opportunity wrapped up in being able to go into your corporate contracts and being able to find out what's in them. So and that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to looking at the value that's found in text. There's great value there that's unlocked, and people are just now starting to discover that the value that's there makes their businesses more profitable, stronger, viable businesses.
Do you have some examples that you could share of how organizations are using text and then combining it with more structured data to gain that value that you were talking about?
You know, you brought up an interesting topic, and that is the sharing of data between text and structured data. And first off, is it possible? Yes, it's possible, but it's actually not all that not all that common. And the reason for it is that when you're in the world of structured data, you're dealing with keys and attributes and indexes and databases, And when you're in the world of text, you find that people don't write or speak the same way that someone from a structured world speaks. People don't normally talk in terms of keys and attributes and things like that. Now, having stated that, if the text has some way to relate it to the structured data, then you can have some very valuable insight. A good example of that is Yelp. That if you go to Yelp, you find that in Yelp there is two kinds of things you find in Yelp. You find the unstructured comments that people make, which is actually most interesting and valuable. But in Yelp, you find information about what company they're talking about, what date they're talking about, what restaurant or business they're talking about. So there is a modicum of structured data in Yelp that you can use to relate the unstructured data back to the structured data. And for example, take restaurants. If you have a restaurant that is interested in what their customers are saying, they can go to Yelp, find out the date, the location, the store number, the menu item, and things like that. So if you're a restaurant owner, being able to know what people are saying is and the reason why this just stands to reason. It's common sense. If you're a restaurant owner and you know what people are liking and what people aren't liking, you can start to accentuate the positive. And by accentuating the positive, you can start to get more customers, more frequency of customers, and that's how. However, in general, can you make the equation between structured data and unstructured data unless you have some way to link the data together? It's not easy to make that association.
So that kind of brings up, as you're talking, and obviously this isn't an overly technical discussion, but I'm sure that a lot of people are interested. Obviously, including text is valuable for the reasons that you said, as well as for sentiment, for different opportunities across healthcare, across customer experience, as you've mentioned. What do you think? Do you have best practices, or what are the key components that an organization needs to do in order to integrate text into a database to be able to leverage it in that way
Well,
without getting overly technical?
I've spent the last 24 years of my life trying to answer that question.
Right.
And I'm going to take you back to the beginning. In the beginning, we looked at something called NLP, natural language processing. And when we looked at NLP, in fact, I'll tell you how far back this goes. I remember studying NLP when I was in college, and I've been out of college a long time. So we took a look at NLP, and we didn't see that NLP really answered the questions that needed to be answered. So we started to look into what does it take to unravel text. And there's an arcane subject called textual disambiguation. Textual disambiguation is the notion that you can indeed unravel text. But when you get into it, you find that text is like the proverbial Gordian knot. You find that text is very complex. Now, people normally don't think of text as being complex. Why? Because we all speak and understand a language. But what we don't realize is that every one of us, when we were at the age of 1 to 2 years old, we're learning. We were learning sounds. We were learning the alphabet. We were learning words. We were learning meaning of words, the formation of sentences. And tucked away in our brains is this mountain of rules that today, when we're speaking or talking, we use subconsciously. Our brains do an amazing amount of background processing in order to be speaking in a language. Well, when you go to a computer, you find that the computer doesn't have all of these rules tucked away in their head. And so, in order to take text and make sense of text, you've got to be able to go into the computer. Now, you don't have to teach the computer all of the rules. There are some shortcuts that can be taken, but there are some things that are extremely important. The number one factor, it's not the only factor, but the number one factor in doing textual disambiguation is something called ontologies and taxonomies. And I don't want to get into a technical discussion here, but taxonomies and ontologies are similar to the world of data modeling, but they're not the same thing. There are some very important differences between an ontology and a data model, except that you find out when you get into an ontology that it's different. There are some fundamental differences. Now, you ask, why is an ontology important? And what does an ontology do for you? Well, an ontology is important because it allows you to abstract data, and you and I, everybody, when you're speaking and talking, you do abstraction absolutely in the most natural sense at all. You don't even think about it. Let me give you an example. I use the word we. You and I are on a broadcast right now. Now, from a language standpoint, by me saying the word we, I'm extracting Lyndsay and Bill. I could have said Lyndsay and Bill are on the broadcast. Instead, I said we are on the broadcast. Now, when you're speaking, you don't think of using the word we in place of Lyndsay and Bill as being anything particularly dramatic. But it's a form of abstraction that when you are doing speech, the ability to organize and classify data is at the heart of being able to do disambiguation of data. And we do it speaking naturally 1,000 times a day, and we don't think twice about it. But when you ask the computer to do it, the computer doesn't know how to do that. And so the value of the ontology is to be able to allow the computer to start to classify things and put them in a text into a fashion that can then be analyzed and looked at by organizations. And so that's a brief journey into how you go from raw text to now, as ontologies are probably 75% of the work that has to be done. But there's another whole subject called inline contextualization. You've also got to be able to do inline contextualization combined with ontologies in order to be able to disambiguate your text. Now, once you've disambiguated your text, you can put it into the form of a standard structured database, and now you can start to do analytical processing against it. So that's a long-winded explanation of how you go from text to now. In all honesty, it's taken me 24 years to learn how to do all of this, because when I started on this, there were no books. I looked for books and I looked for articles and things. There was nothing. There was nothing out there that says, here's how you do it. So everything I've learned by trial and error, and that's a slow, painful way to learn something. But on the other hand, once you learn it by trial and error, you really know it.
Right. definitely. I'm almost afraid to ask the question. Have you
Yeah.
seen organizations really do this successfully?
Oh yes. Oh yes. We have some very good stories and we have some very bad stories. But
Would you share
uh,
some of the really good ones, or at least like one or two that you can share?
um, yes. One time, a restaurant chain asked us to come in and tell us what their customers were saying. Now, let me describe a little bit about this restaurant chain. This restaurant chain, which is a national chain, puts a card on the table, and when you're a customer there, there's a card that says, "Here is a internet website. Please give us your feedback." And this restaurant chain will get around 40 to 50,000 pieces of feedback every month. And so when we went into them, we said to them that, do you guys listen to your customer? Oh, yes, we listen to our customer. What do you do? Well, we have a website that people put comments on, and we get 40 to 50,000 a month, something like that. And they said, well, that's great. And it says, and then what do you do with it? It says, well, we get it printed out. Oh, okay, that's interesting. You print it out. And then so we went to the vice president of marketing and says, and what do you do with all of these comments coming back from your customer? And this gentleman said, Bill, look at this. And he showed me this pile of paper on his desk. There's a lot of comments here. I can't read all of these. Each month they take them and throw them away. And so we said, well, we can do better than that. How would you like to be able to actually understand what people are saying to you about your restaurant? And we can use the computer to do that. So we took their comments, we put them into something called textual ETL. We took textual ETL, and indeed we read and analyzed the customers' comments. Now, the customers' comments were all over the map. Some people were talking about the restrooms. Some people were talking about the parking lot. Some people were talking about the service. Some people were talking about the food. And some people had good things to say, and some people had bad things to say. And so it was all over the map. But as an example of the kinds of things that we found in one restaurant, one of their stores they had in the United States, they came along and said, people are talking about this particular noodle. It was a I can't remember the type of noodle it was, but it was some kind of noodle. I'm trying to, it was a Japanese noodle, Kobe or sobe or something like that. And they said people were complaining about it. So they said, first off, what are people complaining about? And in this case, they're complaining about the sobe noodle. And the second question is, why are they complaining about it? And they're complaining about it because it's one thing to say people are unhappy with something. It's another thing to say, why are they unhappy? So it's important to know that they're unhappy, but if you don't know why they're unhappy, then you haven't done much. So we looked further and we found that the reason that the people were complaining was because of the portion size. It wasn't because something was too hot or too salty or too sweet or something like that. It was because people would like to get bigger portions. So being able to take these 40 to 50,000 comments a month, read them, and find out what people are saying allows the manager of the restaurants to say, here's what people want to see more of. So this is how we're going to please our customer. So that's, and now I've actually got a lot of other stories, and I don't know if you want to go into any of them, but that's one example of textual disambiguation being able to have a business impact.
Right. And I'm assuming that in many cases, I mean, organizations are used to, or they should be used to by now, kind of consolidating their data and getting analytics and gaining those insights, but they're not always used to actually adding text and getting a broader um, set of insights. What do you think? Like, why are organizations driven? You mentioned a good example to start looking at text. Do you think it's a gap in kind of their visibility, or are they suffering? Like, was the restaurant suffering, or is it just that it was too much to consume?
Now that is a very complex question. Let me take you to let me answer it indirectly.
Okay.
About a year and a half ago, I had a most interesting conversation with a professor at a university in the United States, a well-known, well-established university. And this was a professor of the customer experience. And I had assumed all my life that businesses do listen to their customer. That's what I had made the assumption that people had done. But I talked to this gentleman who he says, and he said, Bill, he says, I've been in this business now for the past 30 years, and I can tell you unequivocally that businesses do not listen to their customer. That I can show you from study after study. He says 50% of businesses don't pay any attention to their customer. 40% of businesses say they pay attention to their customer, but don't really do anything. 10% of businesses actually do pay attention to their customer. And so, and I have to tell you, I was surprised at this. Now, we had experiences for one industry. In fact, probably the worst industry that's out there listening to their customer, and that has to be the airlines industry. I don't want to go into the details, but we know for a fact that airlines do not listen to their customer. I can give you personal experience of that. The other ones that don't listen to their customer are banking and finance. They're terrible about listening to their customer. Now, the people that do listen to their customer are restaurants and hotel chains. And a restaurant and a hotel chain, if they don't listen to their customer, they quickly start to lose businesses.
Right.
So there's some businesses out there that are sensitive to their customers, and there are other people out there that treat their customers like cattle. But to this professor that I talked with, he told me, he said, Bill, he says it is a misconception to think that businesses actually listen to their customer. So, in answer to your question, what happens is not all businesses are asleep and dumb. Some businesses actually really do want to increase market share, want to increase profitability, and it so happens that this particular restaurant chain wanted to start to become more competitive in their own marketplace. And so it's been my experience. It depends on the industry and it depends on the individual that you're talking about as to how much motivation they have to wanting to improve their business.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. As you were talking, it kind of reminds me of some of my experiences with my bank and travel versus it's true versus like when you're at a hotel or, if you're choosing your favorite restaurant. So that makes total sense. I just hope that over time it actually changes. And I'm assuming that over time more organizations will actually start to take advantage of text and like in terms of for feedback, but also for text analytics.
Well, people haven't, for whatever reason, and there are good reasons for it. People haven't received the message that you really can use text for decision making purposes, and the technology for doing that is just now appearing, and the early cases are just now occurring.
Yeah. I always kind of like to end any session session with some sort of takeaway. And I feel like because you're the de facto expert on this, do you have any best practices for organizations that are kind of in that situation where they actually care about their customers and they want to start looking at text?
Well, there is technology that does textual disambiguation, and there are some really intriguing cases studies for that. You can find out more information if you're interested by looking at textual ETL. Textual ETL is the technology that allows you to start to do analytical processing on your text.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to do if you'd like to get in touch with integrate.io, you have our contact information below. Bill, thank you so much. In general, I love talking data. And so hearing kind of text, which is a little bit of a different type of conversation than we normally have, but I think provides such a world of value to organizations. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk about this today.
Thank you, Lyndsay. It's been my pleasure.
Have a great day. Bye, everyone. We'll see you soon on our next LinkedIn Live.